Did you know the word sodomy or sodomite originally had nothing to do with homosexuality? It's a word that comes from a biblical story we find in Genesis 19, and it's one of the most misinterpreted parts of the Bible. Hi, I'm Robin Whittaker. I'm a biblical scholar and public theologian, and I like to debunk bad biblical interpretation. So this story in Genesis 19 is about a man called Lot who lives in a town called Sodom with his family. And one evening he meets strangers at the city gates, two men, who he invites to stay in his home in an ancient act of hospitality. And it's because sleeping in the city square or outside the city gates made someone really vulnerable to attack. Now we know it's about hospitality because when we read Genesis 19 next to the Genesis 18, the previous chapter, we have all these parallels where Abraham, Lot's uncle there, also meets strangers at the door to his tent, and he also welcomes them in and feeds them the same bread, and the stories just, if you read them together, parallel each other. Now at some point in the night, in the Lot story, the men folk from the town surround his house and demand he brings the men out because they want to know them. This is a biblical euphemism for having sex. So the scenario here is the men want to gang rape these strangers. Lot is so horrified that he offers his daughters in their place. You could say a lot about that, but for now let's just say it's a patriarchal culture and it tells us whose lives were valued more highly. But part of Lot's disgust is not about the gender of the men, it's that he has a moral obligation to care for people under his roof. He actually says, "Do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." As the story goes on, God harshly condemns this wicked behaviour, and Lot and his daughters are told to flee, and God rains down fire and brimstone on this town. And in the biblical tradition, it's remembered as this place of wickedness, as a kind of warning not to be as bad as the people of Sodom. But again, it's not about sexuality. In Ezekiel 16, Sodom is recalled as a place of wickedness because they are proud and because they have an excess but did not share what they had with the poor and the needy. In 2 Peter 2, Sodom is associated with licentiousness. In Jude 7, it's associated with sexual immorality more broadly, which would include things like rape. The Jewish historian Josephus also mentions the Sodomites in Genesis and calls them wicked and unjust towards men, unfaithful to God, and again, wealthy and horrible with it. So this is how Sodomites are remembered. But at some point, particularly in the last few centuries, Sodomite became associated with the fact that the target of this sexual violation was other men, and it became a pejorative term for men who liked to have sex with other men. In English law, sodomy became illegal, and the punishment for sodomy was worse than the punishment for rape. And still today, this word gets used as a slur or to justify discrimination and hatred towards the gay community. As I record this in Pride Month, my plea is that we stop using the Bible to condemn and judge gay people, and particularly when that judgment is based on a really bad interpretation of an ancient Jewish text.